get anybody else.
Okay, sure. I'll start. Welcome committee members, liaisons, and members of the public to the Legal Services Trust Fund Commission Bank Grants Committee meeting. Thank you for joining us. We will begin at 1 p.m. We are using Zoom with the goal to foster a more inclusive environment and effective meeting. If you would like to comment during the meeting, please use the raised hand feature. To use the raised hand feature by phone, dial *9 on your phone's dial pad to raise your hand and do the same to lower your hand. Please utilize this tool to virtually indicate that you would like to speak in order to help the chair facilitate the discussion. New going forward, all LSTFC and committee meetings will be recorded and posted to the State Bar website. A friendly reminder that this is a video conference and to please be aware of your surroundings behind you. For those using Zoom on a computer, when on mute, holding down the spacebar will temporarily unmute. If you use your phone to dial into this meeting, please be sure your computer's microphone is on mute to avoid audio feedback issues. While joining audio via computer is highly recommended, if an individual loses audio, they can call in separately using the Zoom conference number. Thank you.
Thank you, Colleen. Very compelling. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for a bank grant committee meeting. Before we actually can get started, I think we need to acknowledge that our committee chair has passed away, which is hard for me to say. I'm not actually personally fully at terms with it. But for purposes of what we're doing today, and out of respect for his interest in making sure we did it right, I think that we need someone to make a motion to appoint a chair pro tem for purposes of this meeting only. For that purpose, I would recommend Tammy Mahoney, who has been actually preparing for this meeting and has helped us prepare for this meeting.
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. I guess it's time for a roll call vote. Tammy Mahoney?
Yes.
Richard Reines?
Yes.
Jim Meeker?
Yes.
And Richard Ball?
Yes.
I'm sorry, Jeffrey Ball, excuse me, I'm sorry.
Well, he votes yes also.
Okay, well, you only get one vote, so I'm going to split it between the two. For purposes of this meeting,
thank you, Tammy, for stepping up to do that.
Thank you, yes. Let me pull up a roll list here to get roll taken. Tammy, the first order of business on our agenda is taking roll. May I move forward with that?
Yes, please. And I guess we should officially call the meeting to order.
Thank you.
Take roll, yeah.
1:08 p.m. Tammy Mahoney?
Here.
Jim Meeker?
Here.
Richard Reines?
Here.
Jeffrey Ball?
Here.
Amin Al-Sarraf? Not able to join us today. State Bar staff, Duan Nguyen? Colleen Zato?
Here.
Brady Dewar?
Here.
Are there any members of the public who wish to identify themselves at this time?
There's Zach Newman from Black is on. Allow him to talk.
Thank you. I haven't this isn't public comment. I'm just asking if people want to identify themselves. So not to worry.
Happy to. This is Zach Newman from Black.
Thank you very much. Tammy, we do have quorum, and I guess I turn it back over to you.
Okay, well then I would like to invite any member of the public wishing to provide comments on an item on our agenda to do so at this time. Hearing no comments, Then we'll move on to the next item, which is the consent, the approval of the meeting summary and action items for the February 14th, 2021 meeting.
Is there a motion?
So move.
Second.
I'll do a roll call vote. Tammy Mahoney.
Dane.
Richard Reines.
If I abstain, will you still be able to have a quorum vote?
You know, that's going to be 2 out of 4.
Right.
So I would defer to State Bar Office of General Counsel or to Dwan on that one.
Brady's on.
Brady is on. Brady, did you hear that question?
Sorry about that. I missed it. I'm trying to eat my lunch also. What was it?
You
Brady,
have company on that one.
Brady, I did not attend the meeting in question, and I would otherwise abstain. I reviewed the material and I approve it, but I would, based upon my not having been at the meeting, abstain. If I do so, we may not have quorum, so I need your guidance.
So you can, it is fine. It is fine to approve minutes, sort of basically that you're recognizing your vote of confidence in the others and the person taking the minutes. So you are allowed to vote. Yeah.
Based on advice of counsel, I vote yay.
Okay. Wait a second. Was that an A or an I?
I was actually both.
Okay.
Richard Paul, Jeff Paul. No.
Putting it down as a yes. Jim Meeker?
Yes.
Jeffrey Ball?
Well, I also was not in the meeting, so I guess the advice of counsel, I vote AI.
AI. I mean, has no vote today. The motion does pass with 1 abstention.
Well, it's not an abstention, right? It's just a.
Well, Tammy had an abstention.
Oh, Tammy. Okay. Gotcha.
I wasn't even a commissioner then. So.
Okay, gotcha. Okay.
Should the minutes be amended to show that Jeff wasn't there? He said he wasn't there.
I don't think that's necessary, right, Brady? We haven't done that because Brady has advised before that you can vote in confidence.
No, I just
but
at the top of the
minute,
the minutes say that he was there. It says members present. Jeff
Gotcha.
I don't recall being there.
Oh, so those minutes are wrong then, Dan.
They were taken and finalized like last March. So
okay,
I'll go back.
So we'll do an amendment to that then.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for the catch.
So I think that we're allowed to, like, as amended retroactively. We don't have to go through that again, do we?
As long as there's no objection.
No objection.
No objection.
Right.
None here.
Okay. Thank you. I believe that concludes item 3 on our agenda.
So we'll move on to item number 4. And Dan, I think you'll handle that one.
Glad to. Yeah, thank you. Item 4 includes 3 pieces, 2 of which are pretty straightforward, and 1 of which requires a little bit of review. We have 2018 grants that we're covering period 2018 to 2020. Those had a carryover period that ended in December of 2021. We gave them a full year because of COVID. And we are now finalizing the forms that will be used for those carryover grantees to report those expenditures and return anything that was unspent to us. So within a month or 2, we will know all the kind of end details of the 2018 grants. The 2020 grants are now in their 3rd year of funding, and those funds should be dispersed shortly if they haven't been dispersed yet for this year. So those programs are going to be submitting an annual report in about a month to let us know what they're doing and how much they've spent so far. There's also some funding that hasn't yet been distributed. This includes some funding that's been returned, but most of it is funding that has never been part of a grant yet. And one of the goals for this committee today is to develop a recommendation with respect to those funds for 2023. And if I may, well, maybe I should stop for a second and ask if there's any questions about what we've covered so far. Hi, Dwan.
I just want to add a note so the committee members are aware that the grant that Dan mentioned, the first grant, the 2018 that ended in 2020 that had a 1-year carryover period, they have to submit expenditures report. And if there are unspent funds, the staff is going to move forward with invoicing. And I know that was a request historically by this specific committee to let you all know that we were doing that. We're not asking for approval or but it was requested of this committee to let you know when we would invoice programs. So we wanted to notify you that, and we'll give you the total amount once at whenever the next bank grant committee meeting is.
Right. Yeah, make sure that I can see everything that's going on here before I try to show you a PowerPoint. We have a little PowerPoint with respect to these funds. So let me please share a screen. And can everyone see that this is a meeting of the Bank Grants Committee of the Legal Services Trust Fund Commission? I hope so.
We can see it.
Here's what we're going to cover. It's not a great deal, but I want to make sure that we hit all the important points. What bank grants are, what we've done with them so far, what we've got left, our choices with respect to what's left, and then picking a recommendation for it. This is funding that comes from the settlement of some federal prosecutions. The funds are limited to the provision of legal assistance for foreclosure prevention or community redevelopment. There is no income eligibility standard, but if one of our grantees serves people who are over income, that would not be counted as a qualified expenditure. Although our numbers have gone up, it does sort of impact some of the decisions that some of the grantees have made. The funds that the funds so far have paid for 38 3-year grants in 2016, but they were all pretty small. Another 64 3-year grants in 2017, and then $750,000 in planning grants for the big grants in 2018 to 2020, when we allocated $28 million in both competitive and formula grants. And those are the ones that are coming back to us now. The last piece that was distributed went out in 2020. I should say it was allocated in 2019, and it's funding through this year. That's 13 competitive 3-year grants. And there's also a possibility that they'll get a carryover period of 6 months if they report having unspent funding toward the end of this year when their grant cycle is concluding. There are funds left. We got about 53 million. We've distributed about 46 million, and there are some funds trickling back in. What we have in the bank needs to cover what we've already allocated for 2022, which I don't know has gone out yet because we haven't sent out the reporting forms yet either. And then there's additional funds that might come in from grantees that can't spend down what they've got, as well as the possibility that administrative costs will also need to be billed to this fund, although that's been fairly nominal. We do want to be accurate when we decide how much money we have and how much we can give away. There are a handful of different choices that are before us that we could possibly take with respect to these funds. There are 13 current recipients, and we could just allocate among them. There are a lot of potentially eligible grantees. And based on the response rate last time we did this, I would estimate around 75 different programs could share a formula allocation, which could be 1 year, 3 years. We could do, you know, any number of different things. We could create a new RFP to pick out new grantees, or for 2023, we could just hang tight and gather more information before distributing the funds. The staff recommendation is number 3, but Richard has raised a hand, so hi.
Dan, a couple of questions. Have you an estimate as to funds that will be returned? And is eviction defense part of the definition that might be employed here in terms of use of these funds?
We have a very poor estimate of how much funds might be returned because we're working on carryover budgets and carryover approvals that total in the neighborhood of $300,000. So about $300,000 got carried forward, but we expect a lot of that got spent. So we're hoping that we don't see much of it back. But the scenario of opportunities, you know, the world of opportunities, that's the top limit. And I'm sorry, the second question was?
The purpose of these grants was foreclosure prevention and community development. And my question was, is eviction defense part of those definitions? Could it be?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that it's not foreclosure defense or foreclosure prevention, but there are programs that have convincingly established that there's a connection between eviction defense and community economic strength. So, you know, I think that that's a question for the committee and the commission to look at on an individual basis. But I see a couple of other hands up. James is first, I think.
Yeah, and this refers to Rich's second point. I presume we're limited by the green document on page 2, item I, where it says sole purpose of providing funds to legal aid organizations in the state of California be used for foreclosure prevention, legal assistance, and community redevelopment assistance. So that's pretty narrow. However, I think I brought this up at it was a year ago, so my memory is getting a little faulty. But I asked Juan for the original agreement. It's about a 60 to 70 page document. I read through the whole thing, and there's only one paragraph that addresses how the fund should be spent. And interestingly, in that one paragraph, the sentence follows what Green says, except it says, if I remember correctly, it says for foreclosure prevention, comma, legal assistance, comma, and community redevelopment. Green takes that comma out, suggesting that the legal assistance is only for foreclosure. But anyways, I think our discussion at that point, we said, well, we're really limited by Green since he's a monitor in his statement as opposed to what was in the original document on the agreement with the bank's grant.
Juan has your hand up.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's yeah, you're spot on, Jim, and Dan is correct in that you know, the funds, the foreclosure piece is, you know, it's the regular what you think of foreclosure work, reverse mortgages, loan modification. The universe is pretty narrow there, but we did say in the RFP grant applications that it can't be for landlord tenant work if you're trying to qualify under the foreclosure prong, but if you want to qualify under the community development and you have an eviction defense kind of project, you need to really tie it into our definition of community redevelopment, and it was pretty broad. The definition that the commission ultimately approved. I can't recall though if there actually was a project that came through that had to deal with foreclosure. I don't believe there. I mean, that dealt with eviction defense. I don't believe there was, but you know, there were 70-something, 100 projects through the last 5 years. So that's of interest to you. Dan can probably find that information if you know it.
Yeah, I seem to remember that some of these programs involved providing rental assistance and things along those lines. I could do some research, but I do recall that the term was intentionally defined in an open-ended way, not a restrictive way. Hi, Jeff. What's on your mind?
So I guess my question is, you said earlier that we will invoice for the outstanding balance that hasn't been utilized on the 2018 grants. When do we invoice?
So that's what Dan was saying. We're building out the form now. So they're going to, we're going to release that form, and they have to fill out their expenditures, meaning they have to confirm how much they've spent from the carryover amount. And then we'll get, right. We usually give them about a month. So we're thinking in the ballpark now, probably it's sometime in April, we'll be able to know, but it's a very small amount, as Dan said, about 300,000. And usually with carryovers, they are able to spend the majority of that, if not all of it. So we're not talking about a large universe of money that will be invoiced and will return to us. And that's our hope, right? We give these grants out and we want them to spend every single dollar so that they are able to provide services.
No, I fully agree. And certainly with that reminder, I'm sure they're, you know, we can anticipate for 2018, it's less than 300. Can we assume something similar when we get to July of next year for the 2020 grants?
Well, the one caveat there is when you get to the end of the next grants, they're going to request a carryover. So we won't go to invoice them. What we would do is they have a carryover request. We would bring it to this committee for your consideration. It's just for this past one with the 2018 that ended in 2020, they've already received a carryover. So then the office practice and the commission practice has been, then we go to invoice. Once they've had one shot at a carryover, we don't let them request then another carryover on top of that.
I understand. Okay, and I guess where I'm going with that is, as we are looking at the different options here, if the anticipation is that the number is going to be very small when we get to that number here in the coming months, and it's probably likely to be very small when we get to July 20 or 6 months past July 2023, right? End of next year, that it really, I mean, the amount we're talking about probably doesn't warrant the expense and process of an RFP. Would that be fair?
Yeah,
that amount by itself wouldn't, but added to the existing corpus, it's worth it.
Yeah. So which would be option 4, right? At that point.
Yeah. We're gonna so anything that gets returned would be redistributed with everything else.
Right, and that's staff's recommendation, was that it would just roll into further distribution, right, with other funds that would come in, because it's this carryover amount is not going to be substantial enough to warrant doing a further reassessment of qualification or redistribution.
No, I would agree with that.
I'm just trying to understand the basis of staff's recommendation, which I agree with.
We have funds that are ready to go out. We want to add to it everything else that's going to be available so that we don't wind up with dribs and drabs left over. But by the middle of next year, we're going to have a very good idea of how much that is. And by the end of next year, we will know exactly. So really, the plan before us right now concerns 2023 administration. We have no authority on what happens in 2024, but for purposes of 2023, staff's recommendation is to get the remaining funds together and take our time to do an appropriate RFP for everything that's going to be coming in. Richard, is there a question?
I think we're all on the same, or at least Jeff and I are on the same wavelength. The other issue that I'd like to know before grants were made is which of the grant recipients had the largest carryover. Because if one of our grant recipients had a disproportionately large carryover, we might not want to make a distribution of the remainder of the funds to that grant recipient, or we would pare it down in some way. So that's a piece of the puzzle that's missing right now that I think we need before making any grants.
That's really true. And the situation is so dynamic with the amount of different funding streams that organizations are balancing. You know, we don't want funding to be disruptive. We want it to be constructive. And some organizations are better, you know, ready to take that on than others. So a little bit more information will tell us a lot about that. Let me, if I may, shift to our next slide and talk about really, I think, maybe something we've already gone through. Just limiting to the existing grantees is a very tight limitation and maybe not the best use of funds because they might not be the right grantees anymore. Formula distribution would just diffuse the impact of the funding, which could be actually pretty powerful if it lands, you know, in a few well-chosen places. If we were going to try to do a distribution now for distribution in 2023, we would be missing a lot of information and we would have to do a lot of work immediately to make it happen. It doesn't seem like a good use of resources from staff's perspective to try to force that money out in 2023, but it might be a good idea to think about 2024, which means that for 2023, we would be retaining the funds. We would be making sure we knew how much we had. We would check the evaluations and make sure we knew what worked and what didn't. And we would be able to make a better decision, you know, with a more carefully developed RFP process. So that would be staff's recommendation. And I'm going to pause here with a final comment that during discussion about these options, our chair pro tem, brought our attention to the probability that we might want to talk again before this year is out. Although it's not currently on the schedule, if the goal is to develop an RFP for these funds in time to get them out, by the end, by the beginning of any year, we'll need to start talking about that a little bit more in advance than this. So there was a kind of a trial suggestion that this committee establish a new meeting date for sometime in September to look at options for a 2024 distribution plan. And I would like to turn it over to Tammy, if I may, to just sort of fill in the holes I may have left, or to bring up the points that need to be brought up better.
No, I think you did a great job summarizing, Dan. Yeah, my concern was I don't want to find us in this same spot next year where we still have this funds and now we have some, additional funds and we're compressed on time or, constrained for resources to develop an RFP. So my suggestion was that we, start looking at what did the prior RFP look like? What can we change? Have staff make that recommendation and, start the process sometime later this year. So we're not in the same situation a year from now. Because I think 2024 distribution is what makes sense. I agree to hold the funds, combine it with whatever amount is available for one final distribution in 2024. Otherwise, we could find ourselves here again in 2025 with some leftover funds.
I think that Dwan and Jim both have hands up.
Yeah, I just want to add some historical context, and Jim and Rich probably remember this. In the last kind of two distributions, the commission decided purposefully to hold back a small amount, this $5-6 million. And the intent was perhaps we go for like emergency funding because there was so many unknowns at that time. There was a change of administration at the federal level. And so we weren't sure if LSC funding was being cut. There are also wildfires in California that were raging a few years ago. And so the commission thought perhaps the more prudent thing is let's save this and then see. And then the pandemic happened, and then the commission last year decided, okay, let's save it again for another year and see how the pandemic plays out, and whether we could do an RFP that was a little bit more strategic and would perhaps target a very strategically, a need that's like present in the community. And so that's where we're at right now. And that's why you might be wondering, we had a distribution and we distributed $28 million. How come we have these left over? That's the reason. And I just want to add a little bit more context to what Dan said in terms of holding off for another year. There's potentially going to be other sources of funding this year that's going to come through the Legal Services Trust Fund Commission that we think with the staff kind of time might be, weighing in balance kind of all of our needs in the office, that it might be prudent again to save this $6 million. And you'll hear at the commission meeting, there's going to be a good chance another $12 million that's going to be coming through as part of housing money. Then for this budget cycle, there's going to be an ask that's made to increase the equal access funds as well as the homelessness prevention funds. So those two asks are pretty large. The homelessness prevention money is going to be an increase of potentially upwards of over $100 million. So those, $6 million is significant. The potential that we might be having a lot more money coming through this office, we just think like those resources probably better spent there. And then to hold off in the kind of the former intent of this money to kind of that emergency relief. And we're still kind of in the midst of the pandemic. Unfortunately, that might be a good timing. And as Tammy suggested, a meeting towards the end of the year that the staff supports that recommendation, because hopefully by then we'll have a pathway out of the pandemic. Maybe we'll have a little bit more visibility into some of the community needs, and then we can move towards crafting an RFP for a 2024 distribution. Again, that's a little bit more strategic. So that's the context there. I hope it helps.
Help me. Jim's got his hand up too.
Yeah, I agree with Tammy. I think we should have a meeting so that we don't get crunched next year about developing the RFP. But I would suggest that we don't have that meeting until we know what the carry forward is, so we know what the final amount is. Is it 6 million? Is it 5.5? Is it more than 6 or whatever? And since we're really kind of constrained on what we can use these funds for, given the narrow interpretation of green, even if there's going to be other money, I wouldn't suggest adding more money to this restricted purpose, but that we focus on something that's only going to give us a few grants, say like community redevelopment, fire damaged communities, or something like that, or something very focused, so that we're only going to get a few proposals, but we can fund those proposals at a higher rate.
That's an exciting idea, and in response to the concern about having certainty about the amount of funding, I think that when it comes time to make grants, to assign funding, we definitely want to know exactly what the bottom line is. But we can probably start working on an RFP, in advance of that. We can figure out, what that focus is going to be and how best to get the right proposals. And then by the time those come in, we will know those answers.
Okay, sounds like we're leaning towards consensus here. So I will go ahead and make a motion on the proposed resolution on the screen.
Second.
Thank you. I'll do a roll call vote. Thank you. Tammy?
Yes.
Richard?
Yes.
Jim?
Yes.
And Jeff?
Yes.
Thank you. Amin has not made it here today. The motion passes. Thank you all very much. I'm going to stop sharing my screen because that was the triumphant conclusion of my show.
Congratulations.
Well, actually, thank you. I'm, I joke, but that actually is important. We've made a decision that is going to give us an opportunity to do something focused and useful. I'm excited about the suggestions that came up, and the proposal that isn't really an action item here is that we set a new meeting for this committee so that we can get this moving forward. I don't know if you want to talk about that happening now, if you want me to do a poll about September offline. Hi, Jeff.
So my question is of staff, is September the proper time frame we should be thinking of as it fits with when you think you'll have the information?
Yes, I think September is good and builds in a little bit cushion for us in terms of if we wanted to do a distribution for 2024 to kind of get that rolling. And we'll have at that meeting more firm, the carryover amount. And also what I asked Dan and the fiscal team is to really drill down our administrative funds, because I did save aside administrative funds that we're not going to use all of that because we've been very leanly staffed on the bank grants to get really an accurate number for you all so that we know what the total is.
So forgive me, Juan, I don't have the full calendar in front of me, but this I assume is something that you would want to time at least a week or two before the full commission meeting to ratify, right?
Yeah, so we'll go to the November commission meeting. I think if you wanted to move forward, we can roll it into the November commission meeting. So if you met in September, that's plenty of time.
Okay.
Well, you know, I'm thinking we could have a meeting in September and just talk about an RFP. We always have a meeting in February or March of the next year, at which point we can come forward to the commission with a distribution proposal. But I don't know if we're actually going to have an action item as of September, other than, you know, we expect to do something in 2024, but since it's still 2022, we don't really have authority for that yet. So,
yeah, it kind of just depends on how you all want to do it. But the action item could be simply to the commission that we want to move forward with the distribution for 2024, and that now we're going to work on it. And then the next commission meeting, you'll present the distribution plan along with the RFP. But if you have preliminary thoughts, I mean, usually staff will do a memo of like some things that we think are like emerging issues, and perhaps an RFP can be like centered around that. If you have thoughts, please let Dan know, and he could do a little bit more research and build that into some options for all of us to kind of consider. It doesn't have to be fleshed out. You just give us a lead, then we'll start researching.
Right. Well, who knows what issues we'll be dealing with at that time. So if that's a comfortable time frame for staff, that works for me.
Yes.
I think we should lean towards your guidance.
It makes the most sense of any other options that are before us right now. It's enough time to do a good job, but it gives us enough time to find out what things look like going forward. And it'll give us enough time to do even an informational update at the commission meeting so that, you know, we're on the radar and this is part of people's expectations.
Okay.
Exciting. So again, I don't know if we want to do scheduling here and now. That might not be the best use of our time, but I'd be happy to reach out offline and figure out when would be the best time to make this happen.
What about a doodle poll, Dan? That might be the easiest for everybody's schedule. So
I think so, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Maybe like to start off by honing in on just like blackout dates, but we won't spam you. We'll get this thing set. And by September, we'll have a model that we can debate. Maybe we take it apart, maybe we go forward with it, but you know, something to work with.
Very good.
That's exciting.
So I have, just so you know, the last week of September, I'm pretty well blocked out thanks to Tammy's boss.
So we'll aim for earlier in September.
So yeah, I would say probably second or third week of September is better for me, but
great.
I'll look forward to seeing the poll.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good to know. If I may be so bold as to move in back to our agenda, I think we've talked through item 5A, our meeting schedule. There's a final item on the agenda that's really a recognition for us of Bob Planthold's ongoing concern that you know, we take our role seriously and that we do our best to meet all the requirements that the Bagley-Keene Act has put upon us. I know that this meeting is a good example of that, but in his memory, I wanted to leave this item on the agenda. He was going to give it, but it's just a reminder that we should keep up the good work and make sure that you know, we cross our T's. Tammy, I believe that concludes item 5 on the agenda.
Yeah, well, as the business before the committee has concluded, we will call this meeting adjourned.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much,
Thanks, everybody. Good to see you all.
Thank you.
Take care.